Without further ado, I will give you Radhika Dutt. Again, Radhika, thank you very much for kicking off 2022 with your presentation. Radhika is an entrepreneur. For all of you who haven't met her yet, or for those who have met her yet, just a brief introduction. Radhika is an entrepreneur, and she is the author of Radical Product Thinking, the New Mindset for Innovation Smarter. She has hands-on experience on mergers and acquisitions, and she advises organizations from high-tech startups to government agencies on building radical products to create a fundamental change. She also teaches entrepreneurship and innovation at Northeastern the Amore McCain School of Business and serves on the board of the Association of Product Professionals and the independent publisher Barrett Kohler, and speaks 9 languages. Radhika, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Pepe. I'm excited to be here, and this is also the first talk I'm doing for the new year. So here, let me share my screen. Give me 1 second. So I think based on what you guys just said in the poll, right, this is a topic that I do want to talk more about, ethics of building products, especially towards the end, because I think part of, agile transformation and being agile, there's the issue of ethics kind of creeps in, but we'll get to that towards the end. But let's first talk about agile transformation, right, and just what goes wrong very often in organizations that are trying to work through this agile transformation process. So, very often, and whether it's large companies or small, when they realize that they need to go through transformation, usually there's this, wide range of buzzwords that are thrown around, right? That people say we have to be user-centric, that we have to use design thinking, all these words like being customer-driven and user-centric just take over meetings. And despite all of that, right, despite all the words that get thrown around, the path to actually being more user-centric and being more customer-driven, etc., it just is still very foggy. And often what's interpreted in terms of this transformation and what is needed for this is we need to be using more of lean and agile to give customers what they want. And, this is kind of the interpretation of what transformation means, that we basically have to ask customers what they want and then be agile so we can deliver what they're asking for, right? And this is where we start to run into problems because here's the fundamental thing about both lean and agile. Both lean and agile, they're the equivalent of having a fast car. Right? They help you innovate faster. They help you drive faster so that you can go fast to where you want to go. And what we've been doing, right, over the last decade is we've really been just investing in this fast car. We've been working on upgrading our, Mercedes to like a Ferrari and to get to a McLaren, etc. Right? We continue to optimize this fast car. We try to work harder at increasing sprint velocity, etc. For some of you, those might be pet peeves, but that's what we keep focusing on, right? Like, how do we get better at agile? And what we often forget, though, is even when you have a fast car, right, what you really need is the ability to navigate, to have a really clear destination and know how you're going to navigate to that destination. And so using that analogy, right, what I'm really trying to say is, we're able to iterate fast using lean and agile, but what hasn't kept pace is our ability to have a really clear vision or a destination and a clear strategy. So knowing how do you get to that, right? So that's the piece that just has not kept pace. So we've focused on being lean and agile, but our ability to deliver clear vision and strategy and then have our iterations be driven by that vision and strategy, that's the piece that's not kept pace. And so, the way we've been really using lean and agile, and especially agile in terms of, let's just take the feedback and keep iterating, right? What we've kept saying is, let's just focus on customer delight, right? Like, what can go wrong if you're focusing on customer delight? If you use Agile plus customer delight, that equals a fantastic product, right? I want to prove to you why that doesn't work, why just iterating and delivering customer delight is not what delivers a world-changing product. And the example that I want to use to illustrate that is that of a startup. So a few years ago, an entrepreneur, Paul, came to me. And he was telling me about his startup, right? So he was inspired by the suspended coffee movement that started in Italy about 100 years ago. And the suspended coffee movement, if you're not familiar with it, the idea is that, when you buy a coffee, you pay for two. One is the coffee that you consume, and the other is paid forward for someone who could use a random act of kindness. And so Paul started an app so that you could buy someone a coffee and spread random acts of kindness. Now, the idea is beautiful, right? And so he was really focusing on delighting customers, and his numbers were looking spectacular. So he was telling me about his daily number of users, active users. That was looking great. He had organic growth, which is our nirvana that we all aim for, right? He had a large number of people who would drive long distances for those coffees, etc. So all his numbers were looking good. High net promoter scores. But Paul was not happy. Right? He was not happy because there was one number that was showing that things were not working. What was not working was that nobody was using their own money to buy someone a coffee. Everyone was actually just logging into the app to get a free coffee. So everyone was delighted about getting a coffee, but Paul wasn't able to create the change that he envisioned. What he built this app for was to create just this change where we were spreading kindness, but that was not what was happening. And so following customer delight alone is not what helps you build a world-changing product. What happened at NAC was that NAC and Paul, like, his product had caught product diseases. And I want to talk about these product diseases because they are so common. I've worked across a really wide range of industries, from broadcast, media and entertainment, telecoms, government agencies, as you know, even wine, robotics. It's a wide range. But no matter kind of what organization, what size of organization, and no matter kind of what industry it is, I keep seeing the same set of product diseases over and over. So let's do a checkup where I'll share some of the NAC diseases that we'd caught, meaning the diseases that Paul had caught, right, in this startup, and tell me if you've seen this. This first one is obsessive sales disorder. Now, this is one disease that I will admit to having contributed to myself. This is the disease that happens, right, when your salesperson comes to you with this glimmer in their eye and they say, if we just add this one custom feature, we can win this mega client. And so we say, yes, that sounds mostly harmless. Let's do this, right? And so pretty soon you're sitting with a stack of contracts and your entire roadmap is just driven by everything that you're going to make good on. In the case of Paul's startup, NAC, right? Obsessive sales disorder meant that he kept trying to delight these customers, and what these customers wanted was more free coffee. And so he kept even spending his own money to provide, to create these free coffees that people could go and claim. And so he was spending his own money and delighting customers, but just, nobody was spreading kindness, right? So that was obsessive sales disorder. Anyone see that? Please feel free to share in chat. This next disease, right, is hypermetricemia. Hypermetricemia happens, it's like an epidemic right now, right? Which is where we are completely obsessed with metrics and being data-driven, which is wonderful, right? It is good to be data-driven, except that we often are measuring things without really considering whether those are the right things to be measuring for our particular product. And the way you know you've caught hypermetricemia is where you're measuring lots of things, but your product really doesn't feel like it's getting any better. In the case of NAC, we had all these measurements that were looking good, but the one metric, right, that really mattered was not what we were focusing on. So this next disease is called Narcissus Complex. This is where, we're looking inwards and focusing on what we need to the point that we become disconnected with, what the customers actually need. In this case, right, I'll give you an example with NAC. What was happening was Paul felt like if he had this particular set of features, he would have bought someone a coffee. Like he would have spent, he was very open to this idea of spreading kindness through coffee. So he felt like just by building these features, people would actually use this, right? And that's Narcissus Complex, where we're thinking about what would I use as a feature, and then we build that, right? So if you've seen Narcissus Complex, feel free to share. And then this last one is strategic swelling. There are 7 diseases in total that I describe in the book. I'm just describing 4 of them here. So strategic swelling happens where we just take on lots of features, right? We feel like all of these features are really important to us because, just when everything seems important, the quote that I have here at a large company was, all of these features are important. Making me choose one over another is like asking me to choose between my kids, right? This is strategic swelling, when you feel like you need to do it all to be able to deliver a good product. So what happens with these diseases is that these diseases get in the way of a good product, and they make good products go bad. And these diseases happen when we're missing a really clear vision and strategy that drives our iterations, that drives our sprints, etc. And so what happens is these diseases end up sapping momentum from your agile transformation. And the end result is people within the company start to think that, hey, it's because of this agile transformation, like whatever it is, like it's just not working for us, right? And so it feels like this agile transformation isn't working, but the problem is not agile in itself. It's really all these product diseases that you're running into. So lean and agile, they're great for feedback-driven execution, right? This is what we know about agile, and what it gives us is speed. So if you want to explain this in your organization in just one visual, what I like to show is, speed can look like this. When you're trying to transform, if all you're focusing on is speed, it can look like this, where we're all moving fast, but in different directions. And as you know from high school physics, right, what you need is not just speed, you need speed plus direction, and that gives you velocity. So before we launch into execution and being agile and iterating fast, we really have to define the direction of our speed, and that's what gives us velocity. Now, this is what radical product thinking gives you. It helps you define that direction for your speed. And it's a methodology that helps you build world-changing products. And it gives organizations a really systematic process, a clear approach that helps you build these world-changing products in a step-by-step way and in a way that's repeatable. And so what this means in terms of radical product thinking is that it means we have to start with a really clear vision, translate that into strategy, then into a set of priorities, then into execution and measurement. This is finally where Agile comes in. And then finally, we can use all of these ideas also to be able to engineer the culture that we want. But most importantly, right, radical product thinking actually gives you a set of tools which helps you communicate all of these ideas to your team so it's crystal clear. Now, I want to give you an example of what I mean by radical product thinking and why these ideas are radical. Because the thing is, right, you hear words like vision, strategy, etc., and then you say, oh, I've heard these words before. Like, what is radical about this? And what is radical is that I want us to unlearn a lot of what we've actually learned about what is a good vision, strategy, etc. We're going to do things differently. And here's why. I want you to do this exercise with me, right? Until now, what we've learned about what is a good vision is that a good vision has to be broad, aspirational. If any of you have done a startup, VCs will ask you, what is your BHAG, or a big, hairy, audacious goal, right? That's our idea of what a good vision is. And here is an example of such a vision that is, big, audacious, states a broad goal, right? It's contributing to human progress by empowering people to express themselves. And this is actually the vision statement of a public company. Now let's do this exercise. I want you to throw out ideas for me, and feel free to enter them in chat, where give me an example of a product or a company for whom this vision would apply. And don't feel like you have to get the right answer. In fact, get really creative for me. And I'll give you an example, a creative one. My kids have a piano teacher, and she is helping them express themselves through music. So this could absolutely be her vision. I see Logan has an example of megaphone manufacturer. Absolutely, it helps people express themselves. Facebook, there you go. A drawing package, how cool. That, Apple, Moleskine too. All fantastic examples, right? Oh, Peloton too, fantastic. So, a makeup kit, that's right. So, okay, I think you guys are really illustrating, right? And thank you for all these creative answers. What you've just illustrated is all the way from social media to, notebook and photo tools, etc. Like anything goes. That's what happens when you have such a broad vision. It's no longer acting like a good filter. You can pretty much hold up anything against this vision, and the answer is sure, let's do this. And so that's why that vision is not useful. So the question then is, right, what is a good vision then? And this is why I say that we have to forget about what we've learned about what a good vision is, right? Your vision, instead of being this short slogan and big and broad, etc., it really needs to articulate the answers to 5 questions. And these questions are the who, what, why, when, and how questions. So the first is, whose world are you trying to change? Because it's not everyone. You can't say it's all consumers or all businesses. Like, it's a specific group of people whose world you're trying to change. The second is, what does their world look like today? Meaning, what exactly is the problem and how are they solving this? The third question is, why does that world need changing? Because if we cannot answer why the status quo is absolutely unacceptable, we have no business building a product. Once we've answered the why, then we can say, okay, when will you know that you've arrived? Meaning, what does the world look like when you can say mission accomplished? And then finally, how are you going to bring about this world? This is finally the point where you can talk about your product or your approach and how you're going to bring about this world. Now, what I found is, right, even when you know that you have to answer the who, what, why, when, and how questions, when you start with a blank sheet of paper, it's just really hard to write such a vision. Everyone gets stuck in just the words. How many of us have been in those offsites, right? And we've played vision bingo for like half a day, and you come out with a vision statement that sounds pretty much exactly like what you started off with. That's just not useful, right? And so instead, in the radical product thinking way, this fill in the blanks vision statement really helps you focus on the content so that you're not stuck on the words. And so here is, and I'll give you a little bit, and I'll give you an example of NAC in a moment and what that sounds like. But let me illustrate my point using a different company's vision statement. Here's what that vision statement would look like. It was a startup that I had a few years ago, and I sold it in 2014. It would read as follows. Today, when amateur wine drinkers want to find wines that they're likely to like, they have to find attractive looking wine bottles or wines that are on sale, This is unacceptable because it leads to so many disappointments, and it's hard to learn about wine this way. We envision a world where finding wines you like is as easy as finding movies you like on Netflix. We're bringing about this world through a personalized set of recommendations based on your tastes and an operational setup that delivers these wines to your door. Now, I gave you this wine example because I wanted to illustrate the point that I had told you absolutely nothing about my startup, but hopefully at the end of this, right, you knew exactly what we were doing and why we were doing it. And that's what makes this a radical vision. So let's go back to NAC. How can you apply all of these ideas to build a radical product? And so I want to illustrate that with NAC. And for NAC, what we had to do was to be able to build a better product, we really had to think about the product more radically, meaning we had to think about it differently. We had to think about the product as a mechanism for creating change in the world. That's really the starting point of radical product thinking. Your product is your mechanism for creating change. So the change that Paul envisioned was he wanted to spread kindness and get people to pay it forward. His product was an app where people could participate in random acts of kindness. So his product was really intended to bring about this change. So then we could go about defining a very clear vision that answers the who, what, why, when, and how questions. And notice the level of detail at which we're answering these, right? Today, when people who often go to coffee shops, it's not all consumers, by the way, we were really targeting people who go to coffee shops. When they want to thank you or someone, thank someone to spread kindness, they have to remember to engage in a random act of kindness. This is unacceptable because it results in these acts being rare, kind of awkward, and therefore not a habit. We envision a world where spreading random acts of kindness becomes a habit for people. We're bringing about this world through an app that makes it easy to create random acts of kindness by buying someone a coffee to brighten their day. And coffee really was just a starting point. That's how Paul really saw it. So this was the vision that really articulated the who, what, why, when, and how questions. So once you have a vision, right, what you really need is a strategy, because a vision is great, but that's only a starting point. So the easy to remember mnemonic for a strategy, for a radical strategy, is radical, or RDCL. So that means, asking these following 4 questions. The R stands for real pain points. So what's the pain that makes someone engage with your product? Why does someone care to come to your product? The D for design is, what does our solution look like? The C for capabilities is, what's the engine underneath that solution that really powers the design? And finally, logistics. This is, by the way, the element that's always left off, and we'll think about that later. Let's just monetize it. Let's just, get traction, then we'll monetize it. Logistics is this important element where, how are you going to support this product, train on your product? What's the business model? That's when you think about logistics. So all of these 4 elements come together to define your product strategy. So in the case of NAC, right, the pain point was, well, I, as a user, I joined to claim a coffee that someone sent me, but I really hesitate to give someone a coffee. It's just something I'm not used to. And so the design was that we needed to get people accustomed to giving someone a coffee without having to pay for it first. And they had to learn first to start enjoying this act of giving someone a coffee, then they can learn to pay for it. So in terms of capabilities, right, unless we wanted to start funding lots of free coffees on this app, we had to figure out, how are we going to teach someone to give a coffee without paying for it? And so, this is where Paul went and established partnerships where brands wanted to sponsor this random act of coffee. So the engine that powered it was this set of sponsorships. And so it enabled the feature where each user would get 2 coffees from the brand. So 1 coffee is what you could consume, and the second coffee you had to give to someone. So that was the capability. In terms of logistics, what was our business model? We were going to charge the brands a percentage of the sponsorship fee. So that was the complete strategy, right? So once you have a vision and strategy, right, how many of us have seen vision and strategy kind of thrown away and, completely ignored when it comes to the actual sprint and what people are working on? And that's frustrating, right? So how can we include our vision in our decision making? This approach to prioritization really helps you do that. The way to think about this is, so the way to think about this is, when we prioritize, what you're intuitively doing is you're always intuitively just trading off the long term against the short term, right? Think about your college days. In your college days, you had to make a choice. Am I going to go party tonight, or am I going to study for the exam? It was the long term versus short term trade-off, right? That's what you're doing here. So the y-axis is the vision, the x-axis is survival. Things that are good for the vision and for survival, those are, of course, the easy decisions, right? That's the ideal quadrant. The other quadrant, which is good for the vision, but not so good for survival, so it's not helping you in the short term, that's investing in the vision, right? So to give you an example, if you're refactoring code for 3 months, if you're addressing technical debt, you're investing in the vision, because you're not building new features, there's no new revenue while you're investing in the vision, right? The opposite of investing in the vision is taking on vision debt. This is where it is helping you survive. It's great for survival. This is, when you take on that custom feature for that client, it's helping you survive, but hey, it's not good for your vision. So very similar to technical debt on the technical side, vision debt is on the vision side, but it's even harder to pay off than technical debt because you cannot fire your customers. And so priorities typically are a mix of these different quadrants. If you're planning your sprint, you should do more things in the ideal quadrant, pick maybe a couple of things in investing in the vision quadrant, and you try to take on as little of as little of vision debt as possible. So here's how we did it at NAC, right? So we had to start off by really investing in the vision. NAC really needed a complete overhaul of their code base, and we basically had to restart development. So they had to invest in the vision to start with. So once that investing in the vision was done, we built a feature in the ideal quadrant, this ability to gift 2 coffees, one to drink and one to gift. Then we built out the next feature, which was getting brands to sponsor free coffees. That required us to build some features for brands so that they could plan their campaigns, right? So it wasn't good for the vision necessarily. We weren't building this for brands, but hey, it was really helping us survive. So we needed to do that. And then to counter this vision debt, we also built the feature to be able to take the payment from the user to pay it forward so that a user could spend their own money to buy someone a coffee. So this is how you can think about this even as part of your sprint. You can always think about, what features are you taking on in a sprint? Are you taking on too much vision debt? How much are you doing in ideal, etc.? And there's a question here from David, which I'll answer right now, which is there such a thing as investing in the vision too much? This question is really specific to your own organization. You have to decide what is the right balance for your company. Nobody else can tell you that, right? So if you're a startup that is bootstrapped, you have no money every quarter, you're surviving based on what you make, you might find yourself having to take on a lot of vision debt. You have no choice, you just have to survive, right? On the other hand, if you're a well-funded startup, you might be able to take on a lot of investing in the vision sort of features. So it really depends on your situation. And this is why what is really important about this 2x2 matrix is it's about the conversation. You should be having this conversation all the way with stakeholders, with your teams. It's creating this alignment in your organization about what are the right trade-offs for your organization. So once you have your vision, strategy, priorities, next you can think about, okay, execution and measurement. Now this is finally where your agile stuff comes in, right? You have clear priorities to drive your sprints. So when we think about what drives your sprints, the way I like to translate the strategy into a sprint is, first, I like to create a hypothesis. So here was our hypothesis that we had. And you can write this hypothesis you can write your hypothesis in an if, then, because format. So if you do this experiment, then this is what you expect to see. This is the outcome you'll measure, because here's the connection that you expect. So in this case for NAC, we believe that if we train users to give coffee that's sponsored by brands, then by gifting this free coffee, they'll be more likely to spend their money to spread kindness. This is the stuff we can measure, by the way, because they'll start to enjoy spreading kindness through coffee. This was our belief in terms of why this is happening. So next, you can think about what will you measure to validate this hypothesis. You can measure that outcome. So that meant that we had to measure two things. One is the number of people who are gifting free coffees, the free coffees that they got from brands. And the second is the number of people who are spending their own money to gift someone. And so your sprint activities, these are basically, all that you need to do to be able to set up this experiment. In the hypothesis where it says, if you do this experiment, like under activities, you can start to list what are all the different things you need to do to set up this experiment. That's basically what's driving your sprint. So in terms of execution and measurement, right? This approach, this hypothesis-driven approach, really means you end up measuring what matters. And so every sprint, every agile sprint, like you're actually thinking about whether it's features and how you measure progress, but at a higher level even, when you have a strategy as a product team, you can really measure what matters in a way that is derived from your vision and strategy, so that everyone's really aligned on how you're measuring, right? And so in the case of NAC, what we ended up measuring and how we measured success was by the percentage of users who are using their money to spread kindness, right? So if you remember, I was telling you that at the beginning, it was absolutely zero people who were spending their money on this. After we built this feature, 27% of people who got a free coffee from brands that they had to learn to gift, they started to go ahead and spend their own money to be able to give someone a coffee. And so that's without any optimization, right? That's measuring what really matters. And that was the key criteria for NAC in terms of measuring whether they were making progress towards their vision. All these popular metrics, such as number of daily users, time spent on site, NPS, all of those are popular metrics, but it's not always relevant to your particular product, right? Maggie asks, so number one is basically paid for by brand advertising. Number one, meaning one of the two coffees is paid, well, both coffees are paid for by brand advertising. You gift a free coffee out of that, but then from there on, people learn to gift free coffee. People learn to use their own money to gift coffee.
It was number one on your slide, sorry.
Oh, okay. Let me see. So you mean, yes, exactly. Okay, so a radical product, right? It's the idea of a radical product is really that it's your improvable mechanism for engineering the change that you want to bring about. And that really means that anything can be your product. And this is really what is key to me in terms of agile transformation. You know, when I talked about all of those product diseases that come up, and it makes it seem like, you know, your product is just really not working. Sorry, your agile transformation is not working, or people often see it as, oh, maybe we need to move to a different form of agile, God forbid, like, you know, and or make tweaks to agile or whatever. Very often the issue is that there isn't enough alignment in the team. And once you create the sort of alignment on vision and strategy, it creates a much stronger foundation so that you can do agile transformation. And you find that agile starts to work better because you have the necessary alignment. And so my main takeaway for you is, you know, in terms of how you plug this in, craft a vision and strategy, use radical product thinking to really communicate the why behind your product, communicate your priorities using this X and Y axis. Then you use lean and agile execution. So this is not a criticism of lean or agile in any way, but really that they aren't self-sufficient. They're necessary, but not enough, basically. And so you can use radical product thinking together with lean and agile. And this way you can really create change very systematically through your product by starting with a vision, strategy, priorities, and all of these ideas you can use towards your culture. And I talk about that in the book as well. So yes, if you want to learn more, you can get the Radical Product Thinking book. You can also get the free toolkit. The free toolkit is on radicalproduct.com. And finally, you can also message me on LinkedIn. I always love to hear stories of how people are creating change through radical product thinking. So with that, I'd love to take questions. David's question is, so sometimes the vision is not to make more money for our shareholders. No. So, and the way I like to say this, right, is, by the way, so often I see these vision statements where companies actually have this vision statement of, you know, deliver shareholder value by doing blah, blah, or to be $1 billion company by doing blah. I like to say, you know, think about a doctor. Imagine you go to a doctor and that doctor has a vision for their clinic that says to be $1 million practice while treating patients. Like, would you want to go to that doctor? It's just, you know, what a good vision is. It's not about you or your goals. A good vision is not about you at all, to the point where if you take yourself out of the equation altogether, your vision should describe a problem that you want to see solved in the world, and you would be happy to see that problem solved. Even if someone else were solving it, you'd be jealous, but you'd be happy that the problem is solved, right? That is a good vision. So Maggie asks, I'm confused where monetization comes in. Is there a baked-in break-even profitability point, 5 years, or is the goal for all tech startups to be purchased? Unfortunately, I think that is how we aim now, that everyone tries to just be purchased, right? But this is where, when I talk about product strategy, I actually encourage startups not to adopt this idea of, oh, let's just get traction and we'll monetize later. This is why, to me, logistics is such a key element of strategy. Logistics is where we think about how exactly are you going to provide customer service? What does that look like? How will you train your users? How does your product get delivered? Is it through professional services? What are your sales channels? And what exactly is your business model? If you cannot answer these questions, right, when you're building a product, when you leave those as afterthoughts, it's like building a house and you don't even know who you're building this house for. Like, so for example, right, you would not build a house for a 4-person family, like with kids, and put white carpeting, right? Like, you have to think about maintenance in that house and kind of who you're targeting it for. It's the same thing when you think about your strategy. You have to think about all of these elements of logistics. which is why the RDCL mnemonic is so important and helps you really comprehensively think through your strategy. Nancy says, you've mentioned vision and strategy. How do you describe vision and mission? This is one of my pet peeves. Thank you for asking, Nancy. So, you know, there is so much confusion about what is a vision, what is a mission. If you ask most employees, you know, what is our vision versus what's our mission for our company, right? There's so much confusion. Like, it's just, you know, it's all about the words that people learn to memorize and then repeat back. My recommendation is, if your company has a vision and mission and you're working in that company and you're not in a position to go change the vision and mission, etc., you know, just ignore the vision and mission. And as a team, you need to come up with a product vision. If you're a startup and you have the power to go change this vision and mission, don't do this whole vision mission structure. It's not useful. Think of it like, you know, in Lord of the Rings, you have one ring to rule them all. You need one vision to rule them all. And that vision should be really detailed. When often in organizations, you have this vision and mission statement, that's the short slogan, right? What ends up happening is people end up memorizing it and repeating it, but nobody can really describe in their own words what that company is doing. Whereas this approach to a vision, when you do this as a group exercise, every single person on the team ends up being able to describe that vision in their own words. And really that means that the vision is internalized, and that's what you really want. Oh, where do OKRs fit in with a vision? This is another exciting question. Thank you for asking. OKRs are another one of my pet peeves. And here's why. It turns out that OKRs are actually bad for your product very often. Why? Because very often OKRs are not derived from a vision or strategy. Very often OKRs are kind of arbitrarily set. Sometimes they're set from above because management feels like, oh, we need to be very ambitious about our goals. And sometimes, you know, even when it's cascaded, the teams, when you end up setting OKRs, it's based on, you know, having to measure. Oh, David asks, what is an OKR? Objectives and key results. It's an approach that was really popularized by Google in terms of how do you measure progress? How do you measure, you know, how well your product is doing or how well your company is doing? What ends up happening is when you're measuring, when you just set goals, right? Measuring is important. Setting goals is bad. When you build your product, often you don't know what is the right target for certain metrics. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you set a target for an OKR where you say, you know, we must reach 20,000 signups by the first quarter of this year, right? What ends up happening is a lot of people end up on your team focusing on hitting that one goal at the expense of so many others. So there's been a lot of research that has actually shown that when you set goals, that goals lead to, one, sandbagging and making people feel less motivated. Two, it ends up leading to less innovation because of this phenomenon that I just described. You end up focusing on certain goals and achieving those while ignoring others that are really important for your product. The third is, this is, you know, how people describe it, like very often you set a particular goal for your product. It turns out to be completely flawed. Like maybe 20,000 signups was not the right measure or was not the right goal. Maybe in fact, the number of signups was not important. It was the number of, you know, people who register, who actually make a purchase. That's the important thing. But once you've set the goal, it's very hard to go back and change OKRs because you've gotten all this buy-in across the company. Like going back and redoing it is really hard. So once you set OKRs, you end up following them even though you know that it's the wrong thing to do for your product. So for a lot of different reasons, and you can read the book where I explain, why OKR is bad for your product. It turns out that you should measure, but not set goals and OKRs for your product. Other thoughts, questions? Maggie says, OKRs seem to fly in the face of Agile. See, yeah, it's interesting you say that. To me, it's more about, people, to me, it's more about, how we end up measuring performance. We end up setting goals, and that's kind of the culture. And which is why this OKRs kind of came out of that culture of SMART goals. And it turns out even SMART goals aren't a good idea. But it's kind of a bigger topic. So let's see. Another question was, how would this framework help you to know it's time to do a significant pivot? Interesting question. So one of the things that happens in startups, right, is that you catch this disease pivotitis, which is very often you end up pivoting and pivoting to try different strategies. How does this help you know when to pivot? When you, instead of just, so to avoid pivotitis, where you're just changing different directions, what is really helpful is, we talked about the vision, answering the who, what, why, when, and how questions. It's really helpful to answer the who, what, why, when, and how questions. And then, as you measure, you might discover that what you believed about the answers to some of those questions turns out to be wrong. That's where you know you have to pivot. And the pivot can be at the level of the strategy. So maybe some elements of your strategy are not working and you have to try something else. Or the pivot can be all the way up to your vision, where you discover that, I was targeting this set of people whose world I was trying to change, and it turns out they don't have this problem at all. And so this is where I need a pivot, where I'm going to target someone else. So what is really helpful is to actually rewrite your vision, describing what is your new hypothesis in terms of the who, what, why, when, and how, and then explaining kind of why you need to pivot and what you need to pivot to. So, to answer your question of like, how do you know when it's time to pivot? When you start to measure against your vision and strategy, I mentioned how you derive metrics from your vision and strategy. When you see that your hypotheses are being invalidated, then you have to go back to your vision and strategy and say, okay, I need to make changes. And that helps you decide what the next pivot is. David asks, what does this have to do with Agile? Well, very often Agile ends up meaning that you do lots of iterations, you keep trying different things. Agile makes it easier to try different strategies and keep iterating, right? And when you keep doing that, a lot of Agile transformations go wrong because people think the problem is with Agile. They don't realize that the problem lies in the complete misalignment underneath among all the people who work together. Let's see. John Vins was saying, setting the wrong goals for a call desk can be catastrophic for customer satisfaction. Exactly, I fully agree with you. That's one example of how goals go bad, or goals make products go bad. Gaurang asks, have you seen startups start from scratch the entire cycle of redefining vision, strategy, prioritization, and still be successful? In other words, do you get a second chance? Yes, I think for every startup, depending on how much money you have, but you typically have like 2 to at most 3, you have 2 to at most 3 pivots in you. And so this is why it's so important to really have this clarity of vision and your strategy, everything that I described in terms of your strategy, which is the real pain points, design, etc., you can validate as much of that as possible by doing, prototypes that don't cost anything, by doing user research, user testing, etc. And so you try to really minimize the number of pivots that you're going to go through. And depending on how much money you have, but even when you have a lot of money, really, 2 to 3 pivots is what I've seen every startup has. Why do I say that even when you have a lot of money, you have no more than 3 pivots? It's because even when you have money, if you keep pivoting, you end up losing all your talent. Like, people just feel like, this management team has no clue what they're doing, I'm done. And there's so much choice in terms of where people can work. When you keep just switching directions, etc., people just get frustrated and end up quitting. And so 2 to 3 pivots is really what you have. If you don't have a target, you don't know where to shoot, nor do you know when to hit, stretching my metaphor. So this is, we are so focused as a society on having targets. We really keep thinking that without targets, we would never achieve our goals. If you read the book, even Atomic Habits, what the author talks about, and he was an elite athlete, what he talks about is everyone has goals. Every athlete has goals. It's not for the lack of goals that we don't achieve things. It's really being able to stick to processes and being able to commit to doing something. Like, it's having a process for improvement, etc., that helps you actually achieve those goals, right? So if what you want to know is how can you actually achieve something, or how do you make progress? Well, I think it is helpful to measure. As you saw in the example of NAC, it is important to measure. I couldn't possibly have told you what is the right target for that measurement, right? Because we honestly did not know. So without targets, what do? As a team, you talk about what you measured, like talk about all of your metrics that you're measuring. What do you observe out of those metrics? What can you improve? What should you be working on? Those are the most important questions. It's not about setting targets. It's not setting targets that gets you somewhere. This next question is from Sherry. Sherry says, Radhika, will you clarify, do you suppose people confuse outcomes with OKRs? I'm still wondering how OKRs are bad for product when OKRs are based on the vision and strategy. I think the key there is OKRs being based on vision and strategy. One, I've rarely ever seen that happen. Two, what I'm recommending in this approach, right, is measuring metrics out of your vision and strategy. So, if I go back to some of these slides, one second, let me find the right slide here. So I talk about what metrics we were measuring. These were only 2, right? But there were other hypotheses we had, and we were measuring a lot of metrics. I'm not against measurement at all, very much in favor. My point is just that you don't know what is the right number to hit. Let's say I said that the right metric in this case, right, our target, I'm going to throw some number, just pulling it out of nowhere, say 50% of people. I don't know where I pulled that number from, but now, if that's the OKR I've set, that's what my team is going to be focused on doing. Maybe the right thing for them to focus next on is not that incremental improvement to get from 40 to 50%, in terms of the number of people who are spending their own money. Maybe it's something else in the product that is more important at that given time. And OKRs and setting targets limits your flexibility. Once you've set them, you can't change them. It's so much more helpful to actually have discussions about what are we seeing in our metrics, what should we be improving, and having those more holistic discussions. That's really what I mean. This next question was from Eric. Any thoughts on the relevance of Edwards Deming? He was also a skeptic on metrics out of context. His theory of profound knowledge sounds radical in the sense of emphasis on fundamental understanding. I haven't read that, but thank you for that. I will look it up. And I'm very curious to know what he thinks of metrics. But there is a lot of research on how setting goals is bad. But, you know, it's one of those things where even when there's scientific research, we really have a hard time accepting this. It's like the scientific research that has shown that giving kids lots of homework isn't actually helpful for education. There's also research that, you know, in the early 1800s, in the mid 1800s, when cholera was discovered to be waterborne and people were dying from it, it took 12 years for people to accept the fact, accept scientific studies that were showing that it was waterborne, because they believed that it was airborne, that it was because of miasma that it was spread, right? This is what happens when there's scientific research that challenges our intuition. We refuse to accept it. We have all built this intuition in us for so long that the way you make progress is by setting SMART goals, by setting measurable targets, etc., that we really have a hard time letting go of that idea. Let's see. This next question, what's the difference between an evolution and a pivot? I think, so an evolution might just be how your product continues to grow and incrementally do more things. Maybe a pivot ends up being that you're going to switch from one thing to another. I think there ends up being so much confusion about what is a pivot exactly, because, you know, when a pivot is declared, it's almost like anything goes. Often it's not a true pivot in that, hey, you know, we're going to completely let go of what we were doing in the past and focus on this new thing. You know, we still carry a lot of that baggage, so we end up doing something more in addition to what we were doing before. But that's just because of kind of a lot of you know, you can't fire customers, as I was saying, so it ends up being hard to pivot sometimes. Let's see, the next question I have here is isn't this about choosing a different set of goals, not letting go of goals? It seems that the 2x2 presented and other concepts are still goals, just of a different type. Am I missing something here? The 2x2 that I presented, they were about features and how do you evaluate them, right? So if I look at this 2x2, I use this with the board to talk about strategic initiatives. I use this all the way with you know, teams that are deciding their sprint planning. You can use this with your team to be able to plot your you can give post-its to your team, right, and have them put features in these different quadrants. So that's not a goal that you're plotting, it's features. Maybe I'm not fully understanding the question though, and maybe we could, yeah, Joel, did that answer your question? I think it sounds like I don't have any other questions that I was trying to get to. Did that answer your question?
Not fully.
Yeah.
I get that it's features and directional and all that. But I don't think you're suggesting to try to run a product operation without any goals, right?
I'm saying that it's important to measure. You have a clear vision, you have a clear strategy, you're measuring progress.
Right.
But
so you do have goals, it's just you're measuring them in a different way, is kind of what I'm saying.
Yeah, maybe we're just using the wrong or different terminology. To me, I don't like setting targets. That's what I'm trying to say. Like not setting numbers of like 20,000 signups, or, you know, this product is doing well if we have, and you pick kind of a few random metrics.
I think what I'm hearing is you don't use vanity metrics, but that doesn't mean you have nothing you're measuring against.
You're
right?
measuring a lot. That's what I keep
Yeah.
saying, that you're measuring a lot of different things. Like here
Right.
are examples of things that we're measuring, right? What
Yep.
I'm saying is not helpful is if you set a target for these measurements, you
Yep.
don't always know what's the right target.
Yeah. So it's being agile about your targets, right? Not having any targets. That's all I'm trying to say.
So maybe herein we might be in agreement. When you're
Yeah.
being agile about your targets, so this is not at an OKR level, because once you set an OKR, you're kind of stuck with that for the rest of the year until the next cycle. So if you typically are trying, so let's talk about process. The way I actually use numbers is, we'll have a discussion on a team and we say, here's what we're measuring, here's what the numbers are looking like. We have lots of charts.
Right.
And here's what we need to improve. And we'll talk about what metrics we need to up, right?
Yep.
But I don't know that if I release this next feature, is it going to improve that by 50%, 10%? I don't know, right? So
Sure.
you might improve that next, and then you look at what your numbers look like, and then you decide what you're going to work on, or like what metric to improve further, right? It
Sure.
may be the same one you want to do more of. So
Sure.
there's no real need to set a target for any of those metrics. You're doing this in an agile way.
So I guess if I could, I don't want to drag this off into the mud, but as an example, I worked with a SaaS company, and they had a midterm, not super long term, but a midterm goal of reducing their customer churn rate by 50%. Because they wanted to increase their retention because it's so costly to churn customers. So that's an example, I think, of a reasonable metric that you would hold on to for a while, under which a whole bunch of features would fit in experiments to try to figure out how to get there.
So here's my issue. Are people going to be measured by getting this down by 50%? If so, there might be some people who are so stuck on just focusing on that metric, they're ignoring other metrics that are super important. It reduces the flexibility and your ability to innovate when you discover that that metric is not what is worth it at the moment.
If you have long-term, big batch metrics, KPIs, all that kind of stuff. I mean, the underlying assumption is they can't be changed. I really think we're probably in agreement. It's just about the duration of these things. That if you have targets that you're going to hold for 12 months, sure, that probably is going to be a problem. But if you're willing to flex them every couple of months, then it's just a question of which ones are the most important ones.
But exactly. But then, how do you know how long you should be holding on to which metric, whether you've passed that time that's right or not? So, which is why I'm trying to say that to me, it's more about having those discussions as opposed to being stuck on targets. Targets end up reducing that flexibility. If you're able to communicate and talk about metrics and numbers, etc., in this collaborative way, that's really what I'm advocating for.
Yeah, sure, right. That's what I was trying to say, right? It's not that the measure is bad. It's not that the target is bad. It's that the way people use it gets abused into being a problem.
Yes, I still think that the use of targets ends up getting stretched into something that is beyond what people want in the end.
That's what I just said. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, okay, cool. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So let's see, there was, I think, one other topic that about ethics, in case people want to talk about it, since so many people were mentioning that ethics to you were really something you were thinking about in your product decisions. Should we skip to that topic if people want to cover that in the next few minutes?
I would say so. Would encourage you to do that because that was kind of part of the warm-up.
Okay, sounds good. Let's go for it then. Okay, so the thing I want to talk about in terms of ethics, right, is this idea of digital pollution that we create through our products. And so what is digital pollution? It's this term that I've coined because what I found was, just as the industrial boom has created environmental pollution, over the last few decades, the growth in our tech industry that has really just been, carefree, has led to what I call digital pollution. And, just like in the environmental pollution case, there are a few big polluters, right? And you have like the oil industry there that may be the big polluters. But we know that, most of us in terms of companies have some contribution to environmental pollution through our companies as well. Similarly, when it comes to digital pollution, there are some big polluters. There's the, things like Facebook, Google, etc. But every single one of us, as we build products, we end up contributing to digital pollution. And I wanted to give the example of what I mean by, every single product contributing to digital pollution. And the example I want to give you is a personal example. My son came home one day. This was a few years ago. He was 7 at the time. And he came home really excited to play this game called Prodigy. Anyone have kids who has played Prodigy? It's this math game. It's this game that... it was introduced to some of the advanced math students, right? And my son loved it. And it turned out that my daughter had also been introduced to the same math game. She was also an advanced math student, but she hated this game. And so, of course, as a product person, I'm like, 2 users, one hates it, one loves it. So of course, I wanted to look at what is this? So as soon as I looked at this game, I could tell, okay, I understand why this is happening. This game is about Pokemon-like characters that battle each other. And you have to answer a math question right to get to attack your opponent. And, I know that in gaming, actually, fighting is really very polarizing for girls, that girls don't engage in fighting as much. It's more about full immersion, role playing, et cetera, et cetera. But it was clearly like designed for boys. So I started looking at marketing videos of this company. And, in the marketing videos, all these boys are pumping fists going, yes. And these girls are looking, quite sullen as they play this game. And so, of course, more user research here. I asked my 2 kids, so what do you guys think? Is this designed for boys or girls? Of course, I haven't shown them my research. And my son looks at me like I'm crazy and goes, of course it's for boys. And my daughter looks at me and she goes, but don't worry, the next version will be for girls. And it'll have Disney princesses that invite you to tea if you get the answer right. Ouch, right? Such biting sarcasm from a 10-year-old. And what she really pointed to there was what really is the crux of digital pollution. We try to maximize user engagement, maybe revenues, etc., and we forget what the collateral damage to society is. In this case, it was a math game. They think they're educating kids, right? And their idea is to educate kids of diverse backgrounds. But when they don't really design products for equity, what ends up happening is they're creating this kind of inequity in education where girls think they're not as good at math as boys. And so even if, let's say, and Prodigy, by the way, has 50 million users. So let's say, just half of those are girls. And let's say half of those girls, let's say 10 million girls think that they're not as good at math. That's digital pollution because we're creating more inequality in society. And so there are 5 types of digital pollution I talk about in the book. One is creating more inequality through our business processes, but in other cases, it's creating inequality through our algorithms and how our product is designed. It's increase in polarization, attention hijacking, where everything is grabbing people's attention, and so which means people can have only enough bandwidth to absorb sound bites as opposed to absorb nuance. Then there's misinformation, which basically in helping people get connected, it helps spread misinformation in that it's really eroding our information ecosystem. And then finally, it's the erosion of privacy. And basically, if you put all of these ideas together, each of these elements is really eroding our democracy because, when you have more polarization in society, it ends up creating, like a more polarized society has less faith in democracy. More inequality leads to less faith in democracy. And similarly, without privacy, you can't have democracy. So my point for us is, as we build products, we really have to be aware of which of these 5 types of digital pollution is our product creating, and being very mindful of that and being aware of these 5 types so that we can start to reduce our digital footprint, let's say. I'd love to hear people's thoughts on this. And since, we only have a few more minutes, like, please feel free to also maybe just unmute yourself or raise your hand and feel free to just chat.
I think it's a neat concept. I hadn't heard it phrased that way, or as digital pollution, but I think I talk about those points all the time, so separately. So I like having that neat package to wrap it up in. Thanks.
Awesome, thanks.
Quick time check is 8:10. Just to make sure that we're on track. We'll love to host you for as long as you like, Radhika. Just wanted to make sure.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm all set. Like, I think I have another 5 more minutes. So yeah, if people have any other thoughts, questions you want to share, please feel free.
So what I'd like to actually ask is if you are familiar with The Social Dilemma. It's a Netflix documentary that it talks very much about what we are saying in ways that I was really against buying mobile phones for my teenagers, and I kind of had to do it with the pandemic. But after watching that, now that you introduced me to digital pollution, I think the documentary is really relevant. Talks about the creators of, initially for Google, the search engine, how they actually manipulated the algorithms, cookies and whatever, and how that contributes to confirmation bias. When you're searching for information based on your history, based on the algorithm, if I like wine and I want to find information about wine, I'm going to find wines articles biased towards, so wine is good for you. But it also happens in the opposite direction, right? Wine is bad for you if your search or your those algorithms can be also modified to yield those results. So not much of a question, but just wanted to share that.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I really appreciate that. I think for me, I'm glad that The Social Dilemma, that Netflix documentary was creating more awareness. I think my one issue is it paints it as, a problem that's created only by big tech. And I do agree this is absolutely an important thing that needs to be tackled, but it's not just regulations that are going to do it, right? Like, I think one of the things that I've found is there is just, because of big tech, it's really hard to vote with your dollars. Like, as a consumer, you have very little choice. So where do we have choice? I think we have a choice to be able to vote with our labor in terms of where we want to go work, where we think those ethics match ours. And from that perspective, right, I feel like it's not just the big tech, but we need to be more thoughtful about how we build products overall. Oh, Joel, did you want to say something? I see your hand was up.
Yeah, sure. To expand on that, I'll just say this. I think the problem is far bigger than big tech. Yeah. The problem is maybe they started it, but tapped into the fact that people are willing to trade anything to get something for free. And we basically have an entire global economy that's based on manipulating attention. So if your economy is based on manipulating attention, these are the natural outcomes. And I guess I'll land my plane there, as they say.
Exactly. I think, if you watch Trevor Noah, he's often talked about eroding nuance in society. And in my book, I give one example of why nuance is important in society. So I lived in South Africa during the transition from apartheid to democracy. So this was in 91, and the first election was in 94. So I lived there during those times, and the whole world was watching with bated breath as we went through this transition to democracy. Like, everyone was afraid that civil war was going to break out, right? And there were all these different factions that were saying things that were inflammatory. But what really brought order to the world, or to South Africa then, was Nelson Mandela and F.W. de Klerk. They really provided this nuanced vision, which was about creating a rainbow nation, creating a truth and reconciliation commission, instead of, exacting revenge, right? Like, it was this very nuanced vision. And I think about today, like, if we look at countries and what's happened in Myanmar or in India recently, what I keep seeing is, you don't have the same kind of nuance anymore. Like, had South Africa gone through that transition in today's day and age of Facebook and Twitter, I don't know that Nelson Mandela's, nuanced message would have gotten through. David says, or in the US. Yes, true. Today is January 6th.
Well, and I think if I could, that to me is that perfect example of, in an attention-based world, with competition for attention, any signal longer than small goes away. And the other day I was talking to a Facebook marketer who did a bunch of work looking at retention rates on Facebook ads. Their conclusion was, if you don't hook people in the first 2.1 seconds, they're gone. Yeah. Literally 60% plus of people will be gone if you don't grab them in the first 2.1 seconds.
It's so true. And you know what? I've realized that it's changed how movies are made. So watch an old movie. I now find those movies there's the slow character development that happens, which is unbelievable that it does not happen today. Now it's more like this YouTube generation. If you don't grab them in the first few minutes, that's it, right? So even movies now, the content is different.
Sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead, Scott.
I was just going to add on to about the Instagram or Facebook. I sometimes find that whenever I open it, it can, there are so many ads that will try to get your attention that you can forget why you initially got there in the first place. And it's almost designed to disorient and then keep you onto the platform for longer. But that was just an observation.
So true. Excellent. I think we've gone all the way from Agile to digital pollution. Thank you for going through this whole journey with me. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you, Radhika. Thank you very much. It has been really